Alabama, 1913. The air was thick with dust and heat, the kind of southern heat that never truly left you. In a wooden shack surrounded by endless cotton fields, a boy was born into poverty, and into history. He came into the world small and fragile, the youngest of 10 children in a family that had inherited the scars of slavery and the silence of survival. His father worked the land for another man's profit. His mother, with hands cracked by labor and hope, prayed that her children might one day see something better. The boy's first memories were of running barefoot through the red dirt, chasing the wind. He ran not for sport but for freedom. Freedom from the fields, from hunger, from the invisible weight that pressed on every black child in the South. The grown-ups said the world was divided, one side for white, one for colored, and that nothing could bridge that line. But when he ran he didn't see lines. Only open ground and the sound of his own breath. At night, his mother would watch him from the porch and smile. "One day," she'd whisper, "those legs will carry you far away from here." And she was right. In 1921, when the boy was 9, the family packed everything they owned, a few suitcases, a Bible, and dreams too big for their wagon, and left Alabama. They joined the Great Migration, the long river of black families heading north, chasing rumors of work and dignity. The road led them to Cleveland, Ohio, a place of smoke and steel, where the factories roared louder than the church bells. Cleveland wasn't heaven, but it was a step away from hell. Here the boy could go to school. Here the world seemed to move faster, and he was faster still. He attended a segregated elementary school, quiet and observant, the kind of child teachers often overlooked, until one day during recess he ran. The school's gym teacher watched as the boy sprinted across the dusty field, his body light and precise, his stride effortless. The man pulled out a stopwatch. When he clicked it, the numbers didn't make sense. The child had run faster than any student he had ever timed, faster even than some professionals. From that day the boy had a nickname. They called him the Rocket. He didn't know it yet, but he had just taken his first step toward immortality. He grew taller, stronger, sharper. Every race brought new whispers, new attention. By the time he entered high school he was already a local legend. But fame in that time and place came with limits. The front page celebrated his victories, the back alleys reminded him of his color. There were restaurants that wouldn't serve him, buses that made him sit at the back, hotels that turned him away. He learned early that talent didn't erase skin. It only made the contrast brighter. Still he ran. Through every insult, every barrier, every door that stayed closed he ran, because running was the one place the world couldn't touch him. When he entered Ohio State University on an athletic scholarship, it was both a triumph and a burden. He was now a young man with the weight of 2 Americas on his shoulders. One that applauded him for his speed, and one that despised him for his skin. He trained in old shoes, often on an empty stomach. He cleaned tables in the dorm cafeteria to pay for food. Segregation followed him even there. The colored athletes slept in different quarters, ate at different times. But he never complained. He said that pain was part of training, for both the body and the soul. His coach, a stern man with sharp eyes, once said, "He runs like he's praying." And maybe he is. In the spring of 1935, during a track meet in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the world changed in 45 minutes. On that single afternoon he equaled or broke 4 world records. The 100 yards, the 220 yards, the 220-yard hurdles, and the long jump. No one had ever done such a thing before, not in one day, not in one lifetime. The crowd watched in disbelief. He wasn't just fast, he was untouchable. Each stride looked effortless, as if gravity itself respected him. Newspapers across America ran his name in bold letters. But between the lines the message was always the same. A black man could run, but could he belong? Across the ocean Europe was changing. A new power was rising, wrapped in banners of red and black, speaking of purity and destiny. Its leader promised to show the world what a superior race looked like. And to prove it he planned to host the grandest Olympics ever. Berlin, 1936. For the dictator the games were not about sport. They were theater, a chance to dress tyranny in gold and marble. He would fill the stadium with flags and soldiers, with music and order, with perfection choreographed to deceive. The world would see unity and strength. The world would not see the prisons, the propaganda, the persecution. But fate, indifferent to politics, had other plans. In the spring of 1936, as the American Olympic team was announced, his name was at the top. Reporters asked him if he feared competing under that flag in that place. He simply smiled and said, "I'm not going there to talk. I'm going there to run." And so, in July, he boarded the ship that would carry him across the Atlantic. The decks were divided, white athletes on one side, black athletes on another. He didn't mind. He had lived with divisions all his life. What mattered was what waited on the other shore. The chance to run not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told you can't. The voyage was long and cold. At night, he stood alone on deck, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. He thought of the cotton fields, of his mother's voice, of the promise she had made, that his legs would take him far. Now they were carrying him to the heart of the enemy's dream. When the ship reached Hamburg, the air smelled of steel and order. Posters covered the walls, slogans of strength, images of perfection. At every corner, uniforms. Every face was trained to smile. The city was a stage and the whole world its audience. The Americans boarded a train to Berlin, and through the window they saw a land marching in step. Children saluted. Men shouted slogans. And above them all, the banners waved like red clouds. For the first time he understood what he was walking into. Not just a competition but a confrontation between two worlds. Berlin's Olympic Stadium was a colossus of stone and symmetry. 100,000 seats, carved with precision, crowned with flags. At its center, the sacred oval of track and field, where the regime planned to display its superiority. But standing on that field, stretching in the morning sun, was a man who had spent his life outrunning expectations. He didn't see an empire. He saw a finish line. The games opened with grand ceremony, orchestras, parades, and the illusion of harmony. The dictator watched from his balcony, chin raised, eyes cold. The world's cameras turned toward him, and for a moment it looked as though history itself bowed in obedience. But history, like lightning, has a way of striking where it is least expected. And in the days that followed it would strike 4 times. Each time wearing the same smile, the same calm stride, the same quiet defiance. Morning. August 3, 1936. The Berlin Olympic Stadium gleamed beneath a pale summer sun. The air was heavy with ceremony, the brass of marching bands, the synchronized steps of soldiers, the mechanical rhythm of a nation pretending to be at peace. On that field the world gathered. Flags from 50 countries flapped in the wind, but one flag dominated the skyline, red, white, black. A symbol that promised purity, control, destiny. Every stone, every seat, every second of that day had been designed to prove that destiny was real. And then, into that perfection stepped a young black man from America. Quiet. Composed. Unimpressed. He wore no ideology, no slogan, just a pair of worn spikes and a heart full of history. He didn't need to make speeches. He would let his feet speak. The 100 meters. The race of purest speed, 10 seconds that could crown or destroy a lifetime. In the stands, the dictator sat high above the field, his eyes fixed on the track. Around him, generals and ministers murmured predictions. Their athletes, tall and fair, stood at the starting line. They were the embodiment of the propaganda, the new man of the empire. The American took his place in lane 6. No banners for him, no fanfare. Just focus. He crouched low, hands pressed against the cinders, feeling the roughness beneath his fingertips. The world fell silent. The starter raised his pistol. A single shot cracked the air. And lightning answered. He exploded forward. The first few strides were all power, all instinct. By the halfway mark he was level with the German favorite. At 70 meters he was gone. No one could follow. The crowd gasped, the camera struggled to keep up. 10.3 seconds later he crossed the finish line, alone. A black man, in front of 100,000 people, had just outrun the idea of racial superiority. The stadium went quiet for a heartbeat. Then applause. It began softly, a ripple from the stands, and grew until even the German spectators were on their feet. They weren't cheering for ideology anymore. They were cheering for greatness. That evening, foreign journalists rushed to send their cables. "Negro American shatters Nazi myth," one wrote. The words shot across oceans, igniting a kind of hope that politics had long extinguished. In that moment, one man's victory became a nation's contradiction. In the dictator's box, the leader turned away. He left before the medal ceremony. Later, his spokesman would claim it was due to scheduling conflicts. But everyone knew what had really happened. He had seen his myth outrun by truth. 2 days later came the long jump, and the challenge that would forge one of the unlikeliest friendships in Olympic history. His rival that day was a tall, blonde athlete from the host nation, the embodiment of the Aryan ideal. Before the event, officials whispered to him, "You cannot lose to the American." But sport, unlike politics, is honest. In the early rounds, the American struggled. He fouled twice. One more mistake and he'd be out. The German approached him quietly, offering advice in broken English. "Your run-up is too long," he said. "Move it back. You can jump farther." It was an act of sportsmanship that defied everything the banners above them stood for. The American nodded, adjusted his mark, and flew. His next jump broke the Olympic record. The crowd erupted. When it was over, he had the gold, and the German had the silver. The two men shook hands, then walked side by side around the track. One black, one white. One from a country of freedom that still segregated him. One from a country of hate that still honored him. Together, they made the world's lies look small. The photograph of that moment, two men smiling under the shadow of tyranny, traveled the globe. The regime's newspapers tried to bury it. They couldn't. Truth had legs. Then came the 200 meters. He won that too with elegance that mocked effort. The German runners bowed their heads. Even the crowd, drilled into uniformity, could not help but cheer. Greatness, it turned out, was contagious. By the final event, the 4x100 relay, the world already knew his name. But fate wasn't done with him yet. Originally, he hadn't been scheduled to run. Two of his white teammates had been chosen. At the last moment, they were pulled from the lineup. No explanation was given, though whispers spread that officials didn't want Jewish athletes on the podium. He stepped in quietly without protest. He didn't ask why. He just ran. When the baton touched his hand on the final leg, he was already ahead. By the time he crossed the finish line, the record was shattered. Again. 4 gold medals. 4 times he had silenced hate. In the stands, the dictator sat rigid, his face pale. His perfect narrative had cracked. Around him, the crowd roared for a man his ideology called inferior. And somewhere in the noise, history changed course. That night, the American team gathered in the Olympic Village. Laughter, applause, flashbulbs. He sat quietly in the corner, still processing what had happened. He didn't see himself as a symbol. He was just a man who loved to run. But outside that room, the world saw something else. They saw a man who had humiliated tyranny without a single word. A man who had outrun racism, dictatorship, and fear, if only for a moment. When he received his 4th medal, the German crowd rose again. Tens of thousands of people clapping for the son of a sharecropper from Alabama. No propaganda could explain it. No ideology could erase it. He bowed his head, the medals shining against his chest like fragments of light. For that brief instant, the stadium felt honest, a place where only merit mattered. It would not last, but it was enough. He left Berlin with 4 gold medals, for records and something no one could measure, dignity. He had given hope to the hopeless and humility to the proud. He had shown the world that truth can sprint faster than lies, if only for a few heartbeats. As the ship carried him home across the Atlantic, he stood again on the deck, staring into the night. The wind in his face, the salt in the air. He thought of his mother's voice, "Those legs will carry you far." They had carried him farther than anyone could imagine. But even he didn't know what awaited him on the other side of the ocean. August 1936. The ocean shimmered beneath the ship that carried the Olympic heroes back to America. On deck, laughter and music echoed from the upper levels. The white athletes celebrating with champagne, newspapers, and photographs. Below, in the lower cabins, The man who had won 4 gold medals sat quietly by the window, his medals in a small wooden box. He didn't mind the separation. He was used to it. He had lived his whole life between cheers and boundaries. But as the coastline of New York appeared through the morning haze, he allowed himself a rare moment of pride. For 2 weeks in Berlin, he had been faster than the world's lies. He had made truth visible. And for a moment, the world had believed in it. He thought that maybe, just maybe, things would be different now. When the ship docked in New York, a crowd waited, banners, reporters, flashes of cameras. The cheers were loud, but the divisions louder. He was invited to receptions, parades, speeches, yet still there were doors he couldn't walk through. The President of the United States sent him congratulations by telegram. But he was never invited to the White House. No handshake. No ceremony. The man who had embarrassed a dictator was ignored by his own leader. He smiled politely when reporters asked him how it felt. "It's all right," he said softly. But inside he knew. The track was fair. The world was not. In New York City, a parade was held in his honor. Fifth Avenue filled with confetti, brass bands, and pride. He waved to the crowds from the back of a convertible, his medals glinting in the sun. It felt like victory. But when the parade ended, reality returned. That evening, the hotel hosting the banquet in his honor refused to let him enter through the front door. He was told to use the service entrance. So he did, the greatest athlete on earth, walking through the kitchen to reach his own celebration. When he finally stood before the audience, applause thundered. No one saw the irony, but he felt it. He had outrun an empire only to be stopped by a sign that said, "Colored entrance." The years that followed were quieter, harder. There were no million-dollar endorsements, no sponsorships, no financial safety. In that era, athletes were amateurs, and poor ones doubly so. The medals didn't pay the bills. The headlines faded. And the world moved on. He took jobs where he could, a gas station attendant, a playground director, a janitor. He raced against horses for exhibition money, signed autographs at county fairs, anything to keep food on the table. The same country that had cheered his triumph now looked past him in the street. He never complained. He said only, "I had 4 gold medals, but you can't eat gold." The contrast was cruel. In Berlin, he had been honored by strangers. In America, he was tolerated by neighbors. When journalists asked how he felt about Germany, he surprised them. "Over there," he said, "I didn't have to sit in the back of the bus." It wasn't bitterness, it was fact. He had spent his life measuring distance. Now he was learning a different kind of race, one without finish lines. In 1938, he retired from competition. He was only 25. The body was still strong, but the world had already moved on to other stories. He gave lectures telling young athletes about discipline, courage, faith. He always told them the same thing. It's not the medals that matter. It's what you do with the chance you're given. He had made history, but history had no salary. Then came the war. The same regime he had humiliated on the track now unleashed destruction across Europe. The stadium where he had run was turned into a military post. The friends he had made, athletes from every corner of the world, were scattered into armies and graves. He was too old to fight, but he traveled across America raising morale, speaking to soldiers, reminding them of what courage looked like. To them, he wasn't a symbol of sport anymore. He was a symbol of something deeper, a quiet proof that tyranny could be outrun. After the war, the country he loved began to change. Slowly, painfully. Segregation was questioned. Voices rose. And in that new movement for civil rights, his story returned. The man who had defied Hitler's myth now became a symbol against America's own. He marched, he spoke, he mentored. He didn't shout. He never had to. His life was already an argument. When young black athletes asked him how to deal with racism, he said, "By being excellent. Make them respect your excellence even if they never love you for it." But the years of poverty and stress took their toll. He smoked too much, worked too hard, and never stopped moving. He had spent a lifetime running, now his heart was tired. By the late 1970s, illness caught up with him. In the hospital, his visitors included presidents, governors, athletes, the same kinds of men who had once ignored him. They came with cameras and words like hero, legend, pioneer. He smiled, polite as always. He was too humble to say what he surely knew. They were late. He passed away in 1980 at the age of 66. His medals were still in the wooden box. The newspapers that once ignored him now printed his face on the front page. Across the world, flags were lowered in respect. It had taken 44 years for the world to catch up to his speed. After his death, statues rose. Streets bore his name. His image appeared in textbooks, museums, postage stamps. The stadium in Berlin still stood, silent but changed, and outside it, a plaque bore his name in both English and German. In the place where a dictator once sat in judgment, tourists now stood in awe. Children looked at the photograph of a young black man smiling beneath 4 gold medals, and they learned what history really means. Not conquest, not domination, but the courage to be human in a world that tells you not to be. He never saw the monuments. He never wanted them. What he wanted, he once said, was simple. To be free to run and to be treated as a man. That was his dream. He achieved half of it. And because he did, millions after him could chase the other half. History often forgets that heroes rarely set out to be heroes. They just do what must be done. He never ran to humiliate a dictator. He ran to test himself, to find the truth of his own limits. But the truth he found was larger than himself. It was a truth that outlived him, a truth the world still needs. That dignity has no color and greatness has no master. He began as a boy in the red fields of Alabama. He ended as a name that belongs to history. And somewhere between those 2 points, between the dust and the thunder, the shame and the applause, he became something timeless. A reminder that even in the darkest stadiums, light can run faster than hate. History remembers victories. But true legacy, that quiet, enduring echo, is built from something else, the space between triumph and truth. And his truth did not end with the finish line in Berlin. It began there. Because every stride he took across that cinder track carried farther than any medal could measure. It crossed decades. It crossed continents. It crossed the very idea of what a man like him was allowed to be. In the years after his death, the world began to truly understand what he had done. His story resurfaced not as nostalgia but as prophecy. He had shown, in a time of banners and blood, that power built on hate could be outrun. That no ideology, no empire, no uniform could contain the human spirit when it decides to move. Sports historians called it the greatest athletic achievement of all time. Sociologists called it a political earthquake. But to those who knew him, it was simply a man doing what he was born to do. Run. His name became a symbol in classrooms and movements, in churches and speeches. In the 1960s, when young black Americans took to the streets demanding equality, they carried his story with them. He was proof, living, undeniable proof, that excellence could expose injustice. He had been polite where others would be defiant, but his very existence had been rebellion enough. For every protester beaten in Selma, for every student denied admission, there was the memory of that August day in 1936, when a man once told he was less than human stood taller than an empire. He became a chapter in every book about courage. The boy who outran the world's prejudice and in doing so, gave a nation a mirror. In Berlin the stadium remained. Decades passed, regimes rose and fell. Grass grew where soldiers once marched. And yet, under the stands, the footprints of his victories lingered, for circles etched into the track, where time itself had knelt. In 2009, when a new generation of athletes arrived for the World Championships, they stood on that same ground. They looked up at the sky where his flags had flown, and they knew whose shadow they were standing in. Even the fastest man alive, another sprinter born to lightning, said quietly, "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here." Legacy moves like a relay, handed down, invisible but alive. Every Olympics since Berlin has carried his spirit. In every athlete who comes from nowhere. In every underdog who wins despite the odds. In every moment when grace defeats arrogance. His story repeats. Because the essence of the games, the ideal behind the flame, is not victory. It is defiance. Defiance against limitation, fear, and prejudice. And no one ever embodied that defiance more completely than he did. The power of his story is not only that he ran fast, but that he ran beautifully. He did not run in anger. He ran in joy. And that joy was more radical than rage. It said, I am here. I belong. Watch me fly. His grace made his victory universal. Even those who had been taught to despise him found themselves clapping. He made them see humanity, not ideology. And for a moment even the coldest hearts warmed. That was his true revolution. Not the medals, not the headlines, but the transformation of the crowd. The collective gasp of people realizing that the world they had built was smaller than the man they were watching. Back home, his legacy evolved slowly, like light reaching from a distant star. When Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier in 1947, reporters asked him who had inspired him most. He said, the runner from Alabama. When Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of dignity and justice, he quoted him by name. When Muhammad Ali stood before cameras and declared himself free, he echoed the same quiet truth that had once echoed across Berlin. Every generation of American greatness, in some way, traced its steps back to that track. And yet, his story also served as a warning. It reminded the world that heroism does not guarantee justice. That even the purest victory can be swallowed by the prejudice that birthed it. He had won 4 gold medals, and still had to enter through the kitchen. He had beaten tyranny, and still had to bow to segregation. His life was America's contradiction made flesh. A country capable of inspiring the world, yet still learning to love its own heroes. Decades later, when the Berlin Wall fell, journalists revisited the archives of 1936. They replayed the footage, the gunshot, the race, the finish line. They looked again at that smile, at that handshake with his German rival, and realized that those images had aged better than any speech, any flag, any government. Because tyranny is temporary, but grace endures. In 1990, long after his death, a president awarded him the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor in the United States. It was a gesture 40 years too late, but perhaps not too little. On the stage, his widow accepted the medal, her voice steady, her eyes bright. She said simply, he never ran to prove them wrong. He ran to prove himself right. The audience stood. It wasn't applause for the past. It was gratitude for the standard he had set, the quiet, unshakable reminder that greatness doesn't shout. It runs. There's a photograph that captures it perfectly. It's not from Berlin, not from the parades, not even from the races. It's a candid shot. He's sitting on a wooden bench, tying his shoes before a meet. The world behind him is blurred, unimportant. His focus is complete, his face calm. It's the stillness before the storm, the moment before the impossible happens. That photograph is his legacy. Preparation, humility, power contained in silence. The calm that changes everything. He was and remains the embodiment of the Olympic ideal. That a single person, through effort and grace, can reveal the best in all of us. Not through dominance, but through dignity. Berlin wanted to prove that some humans were born superior. Instead, it proved that greatness is chosen, not inherited. And one man, born poor and black in a segregated America, chose it every time he ran. If you visit the stadium today, you can still stand where he stood. The stones are cold, the wind steady. But when you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The gunshot, the roar, the rhythm of feet pounding against cinders. The sound of the moment when the world's lies tripped and fell behind him. And if you listen closer still, you can hear something softer. The heartbeat of a man who never stopped believing in better. The boy who ran from the fields became the man who outran an empire. And in doing so, he left behind a message written not in ink, but in motion. Humanity is not measured by color or creed. It is measured by the courage to keep moving forward. That is his legacy. That is the race that never ends. Time moves like a race without finish lines. The years blur, the noise fades, but certain footsteps never disappear. They echo, quietly, endlessly, through generations that may never know the runner's name, but feel his rhythm in their own hearts. His echo still lives in every stadium. It hums beneath the roar of crowds, beneath the national anthems and fireworks. It lives in every athlete who kneels at the starting line, staring down that endless strip of track, a path of discipline, fear, and faith. It lives in every child who dares to believe that talent can outrun circumstance. His echo says, run anyway. Run when they doubt you. Run when they ignore you. Run when the system isn't built for you. Because running, in its purest form, is rebellion. In the decades after Berlin, his story was told and retold. Some told it as a legend. Some as a lesson. But the truth, the real truth, lay somewhere in between. He was not superhuman. He was painfully, gloriously human. A man who faced limits and broke them one stride at a time. Every myth about him, every polished version, fades when compared to the real thing. He was humble. He was tired. He was sometimes broke, sometimes bitter, sometimes unsure. But he never stopped showing up. And that, more than gold, is what defines greatness. Because the world does not change through victory. It changes through endurance. The children who once read about him in textbooks became adults who passed his story on to their own. They told it not just as history but as inheritance. When an athlete raised a fist in Mexico City in 1968, when a woman carried the Olympic torch for equality, when a refugee crossed the finish line barefoot, his spirit was there, running beside them. Every act of courage on the Olympic stage carries a trace of him. Every protest disguised as performance. Every triumph born from pain. He opened that lane. He made the impossible possible. In the modern age, his name has become a mantra in locker rooms, schools, and stadiums. Sprinters repeat his story before their heats, as if invoking a saint of motion. Coaches tell new recruits, if he could do it then you can do it now. And when the starting gun cracks, the echo of that first shot in Berlin rings faintly through every race that follows. Some legacies are built on monuments. Others are built on motion. His was both. Statues of him now stand in Alabama and Ohio, bronze, still, serene. The boy who once ran barefoot through fields now stands immortal, cast in metal, shoes laced forever. Tourists take pictures. Children touch the base of the statue, not fully understanding why, only that they should. But the real monument isn't bronze. It's the belief that grew from his example. That greatness can come from anywhere. That oppression can be outrun. That humility can be stronger than hate. Berlin's Olympic Stadium still hosts events. The banners are different now. No swastikas, no salutes, no dictator in the stands. The stone is cleaner, the grass brighter. But beneath it, under layers of soil and history, his footprints remain. Invisible but indelible. If you walk the track at dusk, when the lights dim and the crowd has gone, you can almost see it, a shimmer in the air, a ghost of motion. Not haunting but guiding. A reminder that speed, in its purest form, is truth made visible. What he did in Berlin was not just an athletic victory. It was a human declaration. A declaration that talent knows no race. That courage knows no borders. That dignity belongs to everyone who dares to claim it. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is that his triumph, born in the heart of fascism, would one day serve as proof of democracy's promise. A black man in a divided America becoming the world symbol of freedom. He showed the planet what America could be, even when America itself didn't believe it yet. For historians, his story marks the beginning of modern athletics. For poets, it marks the moment when running became language. For ordinary people, it remains proof that one person's courage can realign the world. He never spoke in grand phrases. He spoke with his body, with movement that transcended speech, with silence that shouted louder than propaganda. That silence still echoes. It says, I was here. I was equal. I was free, if only while I ran. He once said, find the good. It's all around you. Find it and show it to others. It will start to multiply. Those words, quiet as they are, have outlived the speeches of presidents and tyrants alike. Because goodness, like courage, multiplies when seen. Every time his story is told, it grows stronger. Every time a child learns his name, the distance between injustice and hope shortens just a little. And that is the true measure of legacy. Not fame, not records, but resonance. The ability to keep inspiring motion long after the runner is gone. In 2016, 80 years after Berlin, the Olympic flame returned to Germany. As athletes paraded into that same stadium, a voice echoed through the speakers. a recording of his own words from decades past. The battles that count aren't the ones for gold medals. The struggles within yourself, that's where the real power lies. Tens of thousands stood in silence. No one needed translation. Every language understood. Because the truth he spoke wasn't about winning. It was about becoming, about choosing grace when the world offers hate, about finding peace in the act of striving. So if you ever stand on a track or in a place where courage once lived, listen carefully. You might hear it, faint but clear. The echo of feet pounding against the earth. The breath of a man who refused to bow. The rhythm of belief. And you will know that the race never really ended. It simply changed hands. It's your turn now. Run. The stadium fades. The flags lower. The world keeps spinning. But somewhere beyond time and geography, a man still runs. Not on cinders or grass or clay, but through the memory of mankind, eternal, uncatchable. He runs for everyone who has ever been told you can't. He runs for every barrier, every border, every voice silenced by fear. He runs for truth. He runs for us. And as long as his story is told, as long as his echo lives, the world will keep remembering that even in its darkest age, humanity once found a light fast enough to outrun.